Hello, good morning. Hope you're all right on this Thursday morning. Bit of a dull grey day, but it's quite pleasant out there, so that's lovely. It's a bit of a change for the beautiful, bright and sunny scene that I've got lined up for you this morning, which is always good. Just trying to get the bird song up. Excuse my arm. Now I will talk to you about gouache and whatnot, but there's not a lot to draw either, to be honest. There really isn't much to draw today. It's just enough stuff to make it interesting. So we want a horizon line and just a few little twigs and branches, just so we know where the trees go. So I'm using watercolour paper today for my painting. Gouache will work on any surface, but I want to work it like a watercolour as well as like gouache. So I will give you, I don't know, I'll give you till 10 past to sketch out. You can just, yes, you can see my lines on the screen. Just a horizon line, which is about 2 fingers up from the bottom, and 3 big trees that, I don't know, 8 fingers high. And then the stumps of the others, because this is all going to be foliage, but we're not going to draw that in. Just ease yourself into the Thursday morning. Colours I'm using are black and white, ultramarine, lemon yellow, cadmium red, only a touch of, and cerulean blue. Now, we'll discuss it all slowly and properly, so don't worry if you don't know what gouache is, or you've got a set and you just don't know what to do with it, or anything like that. We'll work it out, don't worry. Let's go and let Jackie in. Right, well, we don't need as much gouache like we do. No, we're not. They are. So if you've not used gouache before, it's it's basically a watercolour. It's one of my favourite things. And one of my favourite mediums. And let me move my mouse out of the way. And they are watercolour basically. It's watercolour, but chalky, which makes it opaque. Back in the 16th century, it used to be called body colour, and it was only available in white because it would add body to the watercolour, which was transparent. Sir Nicholas Hilliard, Queen Elizabeth I's court portrait painter, would use body colour with watercolour on vellum for his miniature portraits. And so it was just available as white. So a lot of watercolourists just use the white gouache. That's a much older tube of cerulean that I've just found in my box. I need to treat myself to a new one because I've got paint at home and here because I do a lot of gouache commissions and stuff. So gouache is my go-to paint at home. So it's very chalky. So unlike watercolours, it's opaque and it dries darker and matter because, as we know, watercolour dries 30% lighter. But gouache does not. It dries darker. Now, the thing to bear in mind is that you might think, well, if it's opaque and bright, then it's like acrylics. And to a degree, yes, it is like acrylics. However, the joy of gouache over acrylics is that it can be reconstituted. So once gouache is dry, you can re-wet it. So at home I've got a really old caked out plate that I use for all of my commissions at home, and the gouache just stays on there, and just a few minutes before I want to paint, I'll just spray it with a bit of water to reawaken the paint. But you can use it like a watercolour. It's just a bit heavier in terms of pigment, which is what we're going to do today with all of this. So you can use watercolour brushes, or you can use acrylic brushes. Either is fine. There's no problem whichever way round you use. Or we can use. I wouldn't use sable brushes, although it doesn't really matter because if you clean your brush, you can really clean it well and get rid of it. So I'd steer clear of it while you're learning because you don't want to cake your brushes in. But it's a good paint. I enjoy it. 1010. So it's ancient. Actually, the Pre-Raphaelites used to use gouache, but again, it was called body colour back then because it was only available in white. It's only been in the last, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years. Poster paint came along first, which is like the hip version of of gouache, the trendier version in like the 70s, you got your poster paint, which designers started using. But then the art manufacturers decided to make a better quality version, and so then you get gouache that's probably available in about 50 colours now, I would say, 40-50 colours. You have got different quality levels now. You've got your artist quality. I use the Winsor & Newton Designers Gouache. I'm not a massive lover of sort of like being attached to certain brands, but I have to say, from all the ones I've used, the Winsor & Newton Designers Gouache, although they're the most expensive, are the most vibrant in terms and permanent in terms of artist quality. But you can get really good student versions, like Sea White do a good set of 12 tubes for £7 something, £7.10. Thank you. That would be enough to get you started on how it works. Obviously, they're not going to be as vibrant, as permanent, or as opaque necessarily. Or, of course, if you're not sure you want to get into it, you could just buy a tube of permanent white, quality permanent white, artist quality gouache, and use it to mix it with your watercolours to make all of your watercolours gouache, which is what they used to do. So the permanent white is opaque, and you can see that there's a black square on it, not that one, that one. There's a black square there, and that means it's opaque. So if I show you on the other colours, that's a black square, that's opaque, black, opaque, half black, semi-opaque, full black, opaque, and this is before, oh no, permanence, AA, full black square. So all the colours I'm using are opaque or semi-opaque today. So we'll get painting in a minute. I'll just put my on-air sign on the door just in case people on the landing, because we do occasionally get people come into the tattoo studio who get confused what floor we're on, even though it says art studio and art classroom outside. They still try to break in and bimble in on the classes here. So we want to keep that riff-raff out. Yes. So I don't know what brushes to use today. I'm not using my squirrel. I'm not going to use my squirrel. I could use my acrylic brushes maybe, or could just grab a couple of other brushes while I'm there. On the counter. Yeah, I forgot what we've ordered actually. Well, it's not a very heavy box for the amount it cost, because I managed to walk it in.
A lot of pencils and things.
Oh yeah. And what was the other stuff?
Did we get more brush wallets?
Brush wallets? No.
No.
Oh, the hopefully.
That's what I'm talking about.
Brush sets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hope so, because I could do with some more. But I've got to say, and I'll just interject my own lesson with another fact from another lesson. The acrylic class on Tuesday night,
Yeah.
I'd got an acrylic brush that hadn't worked very well at home.
Yeah.
I'd actually basically forgot to clean it well.
Yeah.
So got a bit of hand sanitizer
That TikTok.
in my hand, and actually conditioned the brush. Then I used a bit of soap, just some Nivea.
Yeah.
And some more. We did learn that off TikTok. So if you get an acrylic brush that is not ideal, I can show you on here actually, because I've got some acrylic brushes that I'll probably want to use. If you see this brush, look, it's an old acrylic brush and it only bends halfway. The bottom is really stiff. But if I put a little bit of what's this called, hand sanitizer, in the palm of my hand and wiggle it around in the brush, you can see it's changing colour, the hand sanitizer. And just to show I'm not lying or anything, this is the 1/2 inch brush, and it's got a black blob on the handle. Oh, I don't want to flick it all over my painting. Right, so I'm going to go and quickly rinse this off. Right, so I can show you it's the same brush, 1/2 inch black thing. Look at that. It's only the real ground in acrylic that is stuck. Now I have spat it all over the paper, so hopefully it won't make huge. It's amazing, Leslie. It really is. A bit of just normal hand sanitizer on a caked up acrylic brush. It did 2 of mine. I should imagine it would work on watercolor as well, but I mean that's probably given me another few months worth of use on that brush. But if I'd need to wash it more thoroughly in soapy water and then rinse all the soap off it, otherwise my paint will get covered in bubbles. But actually that turns out alright. So I'm just going to use a big old brush to wet the sky area. So this is watercolor, so we're going to use the Gouache light watercolor. Now I've leaned all over this, so I've probably, as well as spattering paint covered hand sanitizer all over my paper, I've also got areas that I've leaned on, so my oil from my skin is going to be covering that. So I'm going to go with a bit of cerulean, and we're going to do the background sky like a watercolor. Hope you're doing all right, Leslie, by the way. And we'll just cover it up, so you can see it spreads. It's a little bit heavier than watercolor. The actual body is heavier. So what that means, because it's a heavier binder and it's got a higher level of chalk, it doesn't spread and shoot off all over the place like watercolor does. So you've got a bit more control. I can lift out if I want to, and I can use the white of the paper like watercolors if I want to, or I can use white gouache for stronger colours. If I mix a bit of the 2 blues together, so I've got a slightly brighter blue top, just bring that downwards. The reason why I'm bringing it down is so when I go left to right, see, I can't cover up that blob. I might have to turn it into, can't even turn it into a sun. I could turn it into a sun. And that's my hand sanitizer blob. Or I could paint with it more thickly. If I use it quite thickly, it will work. But you can see I've got a more of a gradation, a subtle gradation here. So you can still, if I want, I'll show you. If I wanted to make the colour lighter, I'd just add white to it. So this is where gouache and acrylics cross over. If we wanted clouds, you could lift them out like watercolour, or you can add them in like acrylics. So gouache is probably the most versatile paint. The only thing to remember is that you've got to varnish brushes, varnish your picture. My brain's not working today. Varnish your picture afterwards if it's on. So when I do my pet portraits on wood, I use gouache, but I do have to varnish it because if it got damp or somebody tried to clean it or wipe it, then I would it would just smudge, because we know, as I said earlier, it reconstitutes. So I'm using the corner of my brush and dabbing. Now some of it is melting in with the paint. We'll do a little bit behind as well. We don't want lots, and I'm only using it to cover up where my hand sanitizer splashes were. So it's opaque. It's opaque when you want it to be. It's transparent when you want it to be, which actually gives you the best of both worlds. I can't pretend I don't love acrylic. I mean, I was an acrylic demonstrator for most of my career early on, and I love acrylics. But for me, gouache has just got that extra edge. So we just let that dry. And it's going to dry in a similar way to watercolour and gouache, because it's water based at the end of the day. So it will behave as all water based paints do. I might get the hairdryer on this, but you know, if I move away from the big brush and use the smaller flat brush, if I wanted to, I'm not going to add too much in the way of depth to this, but you can move it about. I still need to make that a bit thicker where that stuff is, but I can wiggle and move. And let me get the hairdryer on it so you can see as it dries, because there's some areas that are still quite wet. Now what you'll see is because the white was very diluted, that it isn't that opaque in places. You can just see a few areas where the white is more concentrated. So basically, if I want to build up layers of clouds, which is nice to do, let me just squeeze a bit more white out. Generally, like with oils and acrylics, white is your friend. It really makes a big difference, because we're not creating a watercolor today. We are creating a gouache painting. So you can use the gouache a little bit more fuller and thicker, with just enough moisture on your brush to create outlines of clouds. And actually what happens is that you almost get the sense of multiple layers of clouds in this, because you are able to soften and layer. So I can bring thicker white over a wider area. And then fade the bottom out. So it's just a really lovely way of creating subtle skies. Whereas you don't get the same level of subtlety in acrylics, because it is a lot more vibrant. And you don't get the ability to soften, because basically, because gouache is reconstitutable, each time you go onto your paper with a damp brush, you're re-lifting up some of the previous colour. So in this case, the blue tones. So the blue tones are sort of sitting within this. So where it's thicker paint, it's more solid, more opaque. Where it's thinner paint and it's more diluted, it's lifting up with some of the blue that's underneath. So it's giving us a much more subtle variation, which I really like. I think clouds are some of the most difficult things to get in. Even stylized clouds are tricky because of the blend, because of the tone, because of the light. I do love playing with gouache. There's just something magical about it. Okay. But of course you can add more depth and layers, so you can treat it both like a watercolour and an acrylic, but you've got lots of options at every step, which I love. I'm just letting that dry for a minute. I don't want to rush you. And then I think I want to make a little bit of green. In fact, I don't think this is lemon yellow. It's called primary yellow, and it's not as yellow as I want it to be, but that's okay. I'm making a darkish green out of ultramarine, and we'll just place that on here. So this is actually really quite fluid. And we want this to dry. You know, like watercolours can be frustrating in that you work from light to dark, don't you, with watercolours? Gouache isn't like that. You can work from light to dark or dark to light, so you've got the best of both worlds. And I'll be showing you this. I generally work from dark to light with gouache, so the opposite of how I work with watercolours, and a bit more of the way I work with acrylics in a similar style. So we'll mark that green, and I know it's not as vibrant as the green in the photograph, but we will make it more vibrant once this is dry. Just let it dry. So I've got some areas of the clouds that are still standing out a little bit more. Right, so that's nearly dry. So if I actually use the yellow and some cerulean, and a little bit of white, I'm going to stipple this. So the important distinction to make with gouache is the colour that you put on the paper isn't necessarily the colour it's going to look like, and that can be quite, if you come from a watercolour background, that's unusual because you're used to actually putting a colour on and knowing it will dry at 30% lighter. Gouache does not behave in that way. It dries darker and more matte. I'm going to be using a lot of white today, I think. And you'll see as as it dries it will change colour, but you'll still see some of that darker, slightly darker green underneath. And in fact I might even use neat yellow in places over this. So it's all about building up texture. Build up the texture and the vibrancy, but you can keep up a lot of layers. I really do think it is like poster paint. I think that's the best way I can describe it, because it works in a very similar way. Need more white. I probably need more of everything. I've been a bit stingy with a lot of this. So this is primary yellow, not lemon yellow. It's almost as lemon yellow, but not quite. So I want that to dry a little bit, then I'll do a very whitey sage green over the top. Nearly dry. So if I go in, literally you only need such a small quantity of water. Make a sort of sage colour. So there is no guarantee that, you know, this will look that colour when dry. So a lot of acrylic of gouache painting is trial and error. So if you just think of gouache as a cross between gouache and watercolour, you might find it, you get on with it a little bit more. So I'm going to let that dry, and you'll see as it dries how it changes. So we'll probably get to the point of putting all the black underpainting in next, which is a little bit scary. Right, so now I'm going to go with some of the black, and I want the black to be a little bit more dilute, so I'm using a thin brown brush. And so that tree there is not in. Do you know what? I've missed a tree off. I've missed off a tree. There's one there. Can't believe I missed this little guy off. So I'm going to stipple branches and things, stipple foliage and whatnot in this. It's just being able to remember that the dark colours can be overridden with lighter tones. And vary where they stand on the line. Don't have them right at the back. This one is going to be much lighter, so we'll ignore that one for now. Now, some people, when they're painting trees, even though there's lots of foliage on, prefer to paint all of the branches. I don't, because it's kind of a waste of time, isn't it? So let me clean this big brush up, and I want to do some stippling with the black. So I'm stabbing, and then I can create a nice stabby bit of foliage. And again, this is all the darks, so don't worry too much We'll put highlights on top of this. But I know it's scary. It is. It is scary to suddenly have a really dark scene. Now this tree gets up to about here, I think. It reminded me of the tree in Winnie the Pooh, you know, where the honey is and he gets a little red balloon, of Christopher Robin. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I don't know, but that's what it reminds me of. So that's quite solid. And there. I mean, it was. I mean, I grew up watching the Disney cartoon film, and I think I've still got it on DVD somewhere. But even in the book illustration, the old-fashioned pen illustration of the tree, it just reminds me of it. And I'm trying. I can't for the life of me think where this photograph is. I definitely took this photograph. So it's not going to be miles and miles away from where I live. Almost certainly near my house. I might use some cadmium red and ultramarine to create the shadows on the ground. Let me clean that brush first. So it's not as black, it's slightly warmer shadow, because this is like intense shadow on the trees, but I don't necessarily want the same intensity down below, because the shadow on the ground is not going to be covered up as much. So if I mix ultramarine and cadmium red together to create a sort of bluey purple, which is my go-to shadow colour. One day when I make my own paints, there will be a shadow colour already made. And it looks black. It does look black on here, but it isn't. Maybe there's some broken areas. There's some hint of light. I want to keep a little bit of light. What was it that was in that delivery?
Well, pencils,
I know we had lots of pencils, I remember.
but annoyingly, I think you've sold other ones since I ordered it that I could have done with topping up.
Oh, never mind. It's the trouble, we keep selling
pencils.
things.
And brush sets, and that's it.
Cool.
Oh, graph cube.
Yes. Good old graph cube. I'll have to keep an eye on the pencils then and maybe do a small top-up order another day, I think.
What's weird as well?
No.
No.
Looks black, doesn't it? That's black. That's purple.
That's back.
Yeah. It's not though.
Okay.
Righto.
Righto.
Nearly cup of tea time.
Hope so.
What's she like? She has just been working very hard with it. Was it just that one delivery that came? We haven't had another one.
I haven't seen another one, I've just had them.
So with some of this I'm sort of flicking up and across and down. So that's a little bit like how we would do it in watercolours, in the sense that we've put the dark on top of the light, but the trees are the other way around. So what I'm going to do is let it dry thoroughly, pop the kettle on for Jackie and myself, and then we'll reconvene at about 11 to start putting the lights on. We'll turn the lights on. So I'll see you in a minute. I'm back, but I'm just munching a biscuit.
Actually, don't think it's really romantic like Catherine cooked in that kind of charmed with them. Anyway, we'll see. I said I would put a mention on your account.
Right. Let's finish my biscuit. Interesting, Jackie. This primary yellow that looks lemon yellow isn't very lemony when it's squeezed out. I don't actually have lemon yellow in my set here. I'm gonna have to make sure. This is the thing, because I work from home and I work from here. I have to have double of everything because I don't want to just cart everything all over the place, you know. Right, so.
Oh, I know where you can treat yourself to some
Extra gouache.
I know a little place.
Right, we'll go with a bit of lemon and ultramarine to start with. So we're going to do a darker green, and I'm using the thin brush. And I'm going to start dabbing and dobbing. Dabbing and dobbing, dobbing and dabbing. Mile man, so follow the van.
Yeah.
That was what was in my head when I...
One of my nan's favourites.
And don't dilly-dally all the way. And I know why that's just gone in my head. I know I said dabbing and dobbing, which reminded me of dilly and dallying. But I had Tom Carradine's CD on in the car. And that was on. I have to often reassess the things the connections that are made in my mind. How do I get to some random things?
And I also used to like the one about being able to see marshes.
Oh yeah, it does. If it wasn't for the houses in between.
It wasn't for the houses in between.
Right. So the aim is, I still want to keep some of this black, but don't cover it all up, and don't mix all of your colour up all uniformly. That's a word, isn't it? Uniformly. Just don't mix it up the same. Because then you've got lots of different varieties of tones in here, which makes it... I can't speak today.
Oh, that's a shame, isn't it?
I'm sure there'll be lots of people gutted. But what I find doing it this way with gouache, and it is gouache, not gouache or gooch. Gucci, gouache. We get it called all sorts here. I only went and got me coffee, Leslie. I'm sure the coffee breaks will be longer when the classroom reopens, possibly later next month. But doing it this way, that's what I was saying, doing it this way, the shadow is underneath. And it can stay underneath because we just get lighter and lighter with each brush colour. Whereas in terms of watercolour, your shadow does end up being stuck on top because it is stuck on top of everything. But in terms of a painting of a tree, I think it looks better nestled into it. So I want to keep some of the black, but you can see even just with this dark green on here, I will do another layer of this with a slightly lighter green. The light, it's a boring light, unfortunately, in this picture, because it was about lunchtime that I went out, and I always say to everyone, whenever you take a photograph, don't do it in dinner time, because the sun is right ahead and the shadows are short and boring. I don't listen to myself. So this is just lemon yellow and ultramarine. And we're leaving some of the black show through. And I'm doing the foliage first because the dead tree is much lighter and it's in front of several of these. And we can always either miss bits out or paint some back over the top. That's what's great about gouache, is that because it's opaque, any way round is fine.
Are you okay?
Little clusters. So it is about looking at the reference to a degree and just seeing where the darker elements are. So this here is much darker, and then there's a lighter element over the top of it, which will build up. It'll all get built up. And just a bit of fluid paint, just like acrylics. You don't want it sticky. Slurpity. I'll add a bit more yellow. A little bit of water. So I want the light. Well, there is quite a bit of light, and I'm now starting to look at where that comes from, which is definitely going to be the tops, isn't it? The tops are on there. And the thing that we want to do now is to just capture the tops of some of these. Or little clustered areas. I might use some of that purple inside as well. And it's always quite nice to with trees is to blob out, so there's it's not attached to anything. And you might ask, well, why, if it's not attached to a branch, how will that look like a tree? It'll look like the leaves are stronger and are more vibrant than the thin tracery branches that it's attached to. So it just looks more realistic, weirdly, by having floating little dobs. A bit more yellow, might be a bit too much yellow. So I've got a tree here that I haven't actually painted, don't forget. So that needs to be addressed later on. And we will do a brighter green. On top, because it's not showing up amazingly. But I really like gouache. In fact, I've done nearly all my commissions, not just pet portraits, funnily enough, are gouache. I've done there's an artist, or there was an artist called Brian Cook, who did all of the front covers for Batsford Press books, and the very iconic 1940s style landscapes, like the railway posters kind of vibe, and that's wonderful to do in portraits. So I've done a few house portraits in a similar way. So a few little blobs. So it's good to just do random bits that sort of join behind where the light might be catching it in a very different way. So we want to keep some of the darks and keep some of the darker greens, keep some of this green. But can you see how it's building? It looks so much more solid and real in this sense. It's a bit like the acrylic garden we did last week, I suppose. Got to keep my eye on the time, because I could just spend forever and a day doing dobs and dabs. Now, I have got some purple here that I'm going to use in the background of some of these trees now, to tie in that shadow colour. And again, it's just blobs. Because I want to fill in certain sections a little bit more. It's very easy to get carried away though, to be honest. And then I'll go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that many now. But the stippling is a really good way of, like we did with the big brush, to start things off. But what you find is that you need to have a few other extras. Again, like we've got with the light ones, you know, where I'm saying, oh, make sure that they're out of the shape. Exactly the same with the dark ones. And the great element of this is that you can keep flitting from light to dark. There's no right or wrong. If you think you want to do more dark tones, then you put more dark tones in. Right, I'm going to let that dry for a minute. Have some tea. Then we'll do a brighter light. Then we'll work on the tree trunk colours, and then there's some more shadow to go on that one. Is it drying? It's looking alright. I can still just about make out my pencil line. It's nearly dried. So let's go with a brighter green. So we go with a lot of lemon, a little bit of cerulean. So don't forget we can re-wet it. Maybe I should have gone phthalo. More yellow, tiny bit of white in this. And we're going to be more sparing with this. This is like the crown. On the very tops. And I want the least amount of water as possible on it, so it stays nice and opaque. And this is where we can show off those branch clusters where there are little elements of the branches visible. little highlights. A bit more white in there. A little bit more white. It's quite fiddly, but I actually think it's relaxing, you know. So these are all the little bits of foliage that have really branched out, so to speak, grown. So the colours, because they dry a little bit darker. They sort of seem to settle into the paint a little bit more, you know. You could go even lighter, I guess, with just yellow and white. Maybe we will. What's the time? 20 past. Possibly got time to do that. So we're still keeping some of those darks. Well, do you know, I've just cleaned my brush, but actually I might use this just to do some longer grass flicks with a slightly more dilute colour just up in front of some of the shadow bits that we painted. I mean, we did flick, so there is part of that there. But this is just a good way of just bringing it all together. But obviously with gouache, the more you dilute it, the more it becomes transparent. So even the most opaque gouache colours get transparent when you add lots of water. Right, I'm going to let that dry for a minute. Then we'll do lemon, well, the yellow and the white on its own is the final highlight. Then we'll work on the tree trunk colours. So I've got to remember the tree that I want to paint is the tree that I haven't drawn in yet. Can't be gone. Right, let's do some just yellow and white now. So no, although my yellow is quite dirty. So this will be the brightest of brightest highlights. A bit so I'm going to the cellar. It's right, the cafe's not open today, so it's really hard because everybody else is. But the only door into the building is the cafe. And we're all on different floors, so if we hear a door go, we never know who it's for.
Good for your floors rating on your Fitbit.
Does it tell you how many floors you do? How does it know?
It estimates it on your GPS.
Wouldn't have a clue. I'm not fancy like that. Clearly I pay her too much if she's got a Fitbit.
It was a gift.
So hopefully you can see it's well worth building up these little layers, gradually getting lighter each time. Which enhances the clusters of leaves. That's what we're after. Cluster enhancement. And it's where you can bring things forward, push things back. Oh, wrong colour. Let's go. That's the one I wanted. Yeah, maybe that, and then we can look at the beigey brown trees and the light on that trunk, and then add shadow to the other elements of that tree as well. So obviously we haven't got brown that we're using today. We're going to make a sort of beige brown. But before we do that, we make a green. So if I make that yellow, a yellowy green, so we've got, if I put more, the remaining yellow in here, where I've got the ultramarine, then I add some cadmium red. Because to make a brown, you want to use opposite colours to the complementary colour wheel. So the colour wheel that I use is the standard that everybody has. And it's not a be-all and end-all. It's a good idea for a guide. So you use which two colours are opposite each other. So today I'm going to use green and red. You could use purple and orange, purple and yellow, or blue and orange. So you mix up your green, then add the red, and it's a way of working to save just swirling loads of colours around and hoping for the best. It's the same. So you'd make your purple and then add the yellow, or you'd make your orange and then add the blue, which we could do with both of these. We could make our purple and add the yellow, or we could have made our orange and added the blue. Doesn't matter. Maybe I want a bit more white on this one. And it'll all feel like it's part of the same picture because all of the colours are harmoniously joined together. Bit of the light on the tree trunk with that one. Bit of white. So white makes it more opaque. So that's why it's important to have the white, the opaque white. There is a zinc white, which is less opaque. Sometimes it's called mixing white, and there's nothing at all wrong with that white. Nothing. But it is not opaque. So what happens is that you mix a bit of colour and it doesn't do what you want it to do, because you've lost that opacity. I guess for the purpose of this, you could use a white gel pen. Bring out some more. There's quite a lot of branches going across here. With this dead tree. But the dead tree will work better once we've got shadows underneath. And I can show you as well with this method how you can make some branches look like they're in front, some branches look like they're behind, all that kind of thing. So this time we're putting the lights over the top, which again is not the norm. Maybe something like that. There are some random tree trunks in here, but I'm going to leave that. I'm just going to let that dry totally now, and we'll be doing some more purple, obviously, to really bring that tree forward. It always astounds me how fast these lessons go. In a good way, because it means that 2 hours have passed and we've just been totally absorbed in the moment, which is perfect, is what it's all about. So at the moment it just looks weird, like this beige tree. But we've got... So there are two things. Because the light is coming from above, the underside of all of the branches are going to be darker, but also some of the branches will be casting shadow on down the trunk. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to create, which will hopefully add to the beauty of the scene. Because, I mean, there's not really anything going on, is there? As such. Do you know what? Actually, do you know what? I've missed off some bluey trees in the distance on this side. A bit of ultramarine and a little bit of lemon yellow. The reason why I'm adding this, A, it is in the picture, and I've remembered where I took this. This is down the lane where I live. But it gives us a background. So we've got a background and a midground. We will also need to do a foreground. I'm just mixing up my purple colour from ultramarine and cadmium red. Let me just... I need to get the hairdryer on this. Just... because I'm going to be leaning on it and I'll just end up getting covered. I know what I'm like, and I just throw my brush across the room. So I want this to be quite a dilute colour. So let's say we wanted a branch to come across the tree. Basically, you just bring the darker part of the shadow under. And this does make such a difference. Now, you could also you could use a black pen, I guess, for this, but you don't have to darken all elements of the branches either. Just the ones where they cross over the lighter areas to make them stand out a little bit more. And you can see I'm adding dark shadows where the light may just casting the shadows on the trunk. Like that. Sneakily highlight up, outline little bits of that. Now I could use a gel pen if I wanted to, and I'll show you how. I'm just going to get the hairdryer on this again. And if I use a gel pen, because you might not have a brush fine enough, or you might struggle to get the fine branches in, so you could use a gel pen to do much finer branches, but please take it from me, wait until it's dry. I've got in a pot at home, because I do the drawn to acrylics on a Tuesday night and the watercolours on a Monday night from home until the classroom is back on its feet, reopened, and I'm very impatient, and I've got 3 pens that I can't use because I've gone in while it's wet and clog them up, and I can't unclog. Oh, while you were sorting the delivery out, Jackie, I actually used this brush with some hand gel.
Yes.
And yeah, I've given it an extra 50% flexibility. So I will go through it.
Yeah.
We've got tons of acrylic brushes back from when we used to, and probably will get back into providing art materials to students in the class. So sometimes some of the brushes don't get looked after as well as we would like, and some of them are quite caked up, aren't they? So now we know that I've got loads of brush cleaners and things, but they just don't always.
I did manage to get one of yours to improve a lot with surgical spirit and
Yeah.
soap. I suppose hand sanitizer is similar.
Well, it's alcohol, isn't it? It's the
Yes,
alcohol in it that
alcohol.
breaks everything down. So it does work. We know it works, and we've done an extra
But
bit.
since everyone has hand sanitizer,
Well, this is it.
It's a handy tip.
Exactly. Right. I think that's quite nice with all of that. Oh, it looks really 3D now. How exciting!
Is
Right.
it good?
Of course, it's good. I've painted it.
Oh, it's amazing.
We're just doing some. We're going to do some grass now. Because there's some reddy brown grass, which is good because we've got some red here. I haven't got red ear. I've got red hair. There's not a red deer either. And what you need is 3 layers of land: a background, a midground, and a foreground. Now, in this photograph, there is not. There is a background and a midground. I'm standing in the foreground because I took the photograph. But I think you'll see with a bit of device using how it can change. I'm going to use a little bit of cadmium red and ultramarine, but more reddish, and we're going to put a few clusters of flicks of red grass just hither and thither. And I'm going to go in with some slightly darker grass, quite bluey green, and just right at the front. Flick up, not all over, because this is a meadow. Was there a horse in this photograph? Is that why I took it? No. I took it because of the shadows. But this is where the horses live, you see, down my lane, and I know they get a bit funny. The owner challenged a photographer while I was walking past one day, because they were in the field taking photographs of the horses, and some horses can get a little bit scared, or they're not used to having photographs and people in the field other than the owners. So you should always ask permission if you're going in a field to get into the up close of the face of a horse. Let's give it a slightly lighter version of the darker green. Just for little clumps and clusters of grass. Right. So actually this is the last session on this brochure. We'll be having to get a little bit ahead of ourselves over next week and start changing all of the links online, because people can still access these classes forever and a day, but we need to make it easier for you to find the July to December classes, because the next Thursday is the 1st of July. Da, da, da. And we're actually going to do, it's the first Thursday of the month is always pencil. So we're going to have a drawing lesson, and it's going to be a cat's head up close, so the close-up of a cat. But I will let you know what's coming up this week. This afternoon's watercolour class is an elephant and calf in watercolour, but I'm going to do that in a very interesting way. Friday afternoon is Three Cliffs Bay in the Gower. Monday morning, a rearing white horse in pencil. Monday evening, the elephant and calf in watercolour. Tuesday afternoon, deer at Savernake Forest. It's not a big deer, it's more about the forest than the deer. Tuesday evening is a horse portrait in pencil. Wednesday afternoon is the picnic, and it's about figure practice, more than painting the food. And then next Thursday morning is our cat head up close in pencil. Also, from the 5th of July, our art group in the village halls will be reconvening. We used to be at Great Bourton, but we're restarting in Wardington. It's a slightly bigger hall than we've had before, so it should give us a bit more space for development and growth. So that would be really nice. It'd be nice to have some slight normality until we can plan a safe return of these classes in a good way. So how have you found today? Have you found it interesting? Have you found it awful? Will you never do it again? You could do this in you could do this in acrylic. Wouldn't be quite the same if this is your first foray into gouache. I hope you've enjoyed it, because it's very different. If I wanted to bring out areas of that paler tree, all I need to do, because I've got 5 minutes, haven't I yet, is bring more purple around where I've got lighter areas. It's kind of cheating, I suppose, because we're forcing lights and darks, but only we know that. Whoever's looking at it won't know that we've done that, because they won't have the photograph, and it's me that took it, so it's not like they can download the photograph. So darker foliage brings out the highlights. Especially against the lighter side of branches and the tree. Right, that will do. Good, I'm glad you enjoyed it, Leslie. And no birds, no life in this. It is just light, shadow and trees. I've enjoyed doing that. I will take a photograph of it, of course, and I've just spotted I just need to do some more darks just underneath a few. I'm not being a just adder, no, I'm I've got highlights without any darks underneath, which is weird. Because I won't be able to sleep at night then if I don't do that. Right, that's it, I'm done. I will take a photograph of this and I will add it underneath the reference section where I posted the image earlier this morning. So thank you so much for your company. It's been lovely to have you joining me and painting with you this morning. So if you are have used gouache and this is your first time and you're on a palette, just leave the colours on your palette. Let it go hard. You can wipe off any of the mixes that you don't want anymore, but leave the colours on there because you can just reconstitute them and keep using them until they run out. That's the joy of gouache against acrylic. If this was acrylic, it would be lost on that paper and we wouldn't be able to do anything with it. So there we go. Thanks ever so much. I'm sure I'll see you online at some point. Our shop is open Tuesday to Saturday, 10 till 4, or online on thearcheryonline.com 24/7 with no charge for postage and packaging to mainland UK and no minimum spend. So there are lots of ways that you can be creative over the weekend. And it's supposed to be really nice weather, so maybe get out and take some photographs as well. So you've got a good bank of reference images to help you create on the dull, damp weather when you don't want to leave the house. So thank you very much. Thanks, Leslie. Take care, and I'll see you all soon. Bye bye, everybody. Bye bye.